those who feared the fire of a true heir. His cradle was no bed of peace but the tossing deck of a small ship fleeing from danger and destiny alike. The child grew thin and hungry, the salt of the sea stinging his skin, the cries of gulls his first lullaby. His mother whispered sagas of great kings and of gods who walked the earth, and she told him that he too would carve his place among them. Though the world rose against him, though he was cast into exile, though shadows closed about him, still he would rise, for he was born of thunder. In the years that followed, the boy was torn from the safety of his mother's arms, seized by slavers and dragged far across the waters into a land where his tongue was strange and his name meant nothing. Chains bit into his young flesh and labor bent his back, but he did not break. Instead his spirit grew hard as iron, his eyes blazed with secret fire, for he swore within the silent hours of night that he would not die a thrall, he would not be forgotten, he would not vanish into the dust of slaves, he would return and claim what was his by right. So he grew tall and fierce, his hands quick with the oar and the sword, his back strong as a bear, his mind sharpened by pain. He listened, he watched, he learned the ways of his masters, he took in their knowledge but never gave his soul, and when the chance came he broke his bonds with blood and cunning. He struck his captors down and fled across the waves free, at last the sea welcoming him like a long-lost brother. The north remembered him, the fjords whispered his name as his ships cut through the waters once more, now not as a boy but as a wolf of war, clad in steel, crowned by the spray of the ocean. He gathered men about him, warriors eager for plunder and fame, men who saw in him the gleam of destiny. He promised them gold and he gave them blood, he promised them glory and he gave them fire. Together they raided the coasts of England, the Isles of Scotland and the green lands of Ireland. His dragon ships blackened the horizon and the people trembled, for none could stand before the fury of Olaf. He struck swift and he struck hard, villages burned like torches, fields were drowned in blood, monasteries looted of their treasures, and yet he was more than a mere raider. He fought with a purpose, building his name, building his strength. With each conquest his legend spread until even kings spoke his name with dread. The boy, once a slave, was now the terror of seas, the warlord whose banner carried fear across 1,000 shores. But still his gaze turned back to Norway, for there in the mountains and valleys lay the throne that had been stolen from his line. There dwelt the Jarls who ruled in pride and arrogance, there lay the crown that awaited only the hand strong enough to seize it, and Olaf swore that hand would be his. He gathered his fleet greater than before, longships with carved serpents at their prows, sails red with the fire of war, shields bright upon the rails, warriors shouting his name as they drove their oars through the dark waves. And he sailed homeward not as an exile but as a conqueror. The Jarls who defied him fell like trees before the axe. One by one their halls were stormed, their warriors slain, their women and children spared, only to see the might of the land. And the Viking he forced him to bend the knee or be ground into dust under his heel, and in the end Norway burned before him, the land of fjords and forests and mountains united. Beneath his sword Olaf Tryggvason sat upon the throne of his father's crown, not by peace but by the terror he inspired and the loyalty he commanded. Yet Olaf was not content with only war, for he bore within him a fire of faith. He had taken the White Christ as his God, not as a meek servant but as a warrior king. He spread that faith through Norway, not with soft words but with steel and flame. The people who resisted were baptized in blood, the idols of the old gods were broken, cast into rivers and seas, the sacred groves burned. His warriors carried the cross upon their shields as they had once carried the hammer of Thor, and the land trembled under this new fire. Many feared him, for his hand was heavy, yet many followed him, for they saw in him not just a king but a prophet of steel. He promised salvation, but he delivered it with the edge of a sword. He built churches where there had been shrines, he raised crosses where once had stood idols, and he made the name of Olaf ring with both dread and reverence throughout the north. His fleet was his throne, his longships his crown. He ruled as much upon the sea as upon the land. His warriors trusted him, for he was ever at the front of battle, never hiding behind walls or men. His sword bit as deep as theirs, his shield was as battered, his voice louder than the clash of steel, his laughter echoing in the storm. He was king and he was warlord, he was servant of the White Christ, and yet he was still the wolf of the sea, and all who saw him knew they looked upon a man greater than life. And so the saga of Olaf grew ever wider as he drove his enemies before him and built his realm with fire and faith. His name spread across the north and beyond, across England and Ireland, across Denmark and Sweden, across the wide waters of the Baltic. He was feared and envied, yet always he sought more, always his eyes looked beyond the horizon, for the storm within him could not be still. He was born of the sea, shaped by chains, freed by blood, crowned by battle and bound by destiny. Thus stood Olaf Tryggvason, king of Norway, the storm of the north, the hammer of the seas, the sword of the White Christ, and though his reign was young, his legend already burned like the northern lights blazing across the dark sky of history. The throne of Norway was now his, and the halls of the Jarls echoed with the sound of his commands. His warriors walked with the pride of men who followed a living storm, and his ships carried the new banner of the White Christ into every harbor. The land bent beneath his will, yet Olaf hungered for more, for kings are never content with crowns alone, and the fire in his heart drove him to carve his name across the seas as no man had done before. He sent his longships to England once more, and the coasts trembled at his return, for he struck like lightning upon the monasteries and towns, his warriors dragging forth silver and gold relics and jewels. Yet he did not forget the cross and the sword worked side by side. He baptized with fire, and he built churches upon the ruins of temples. He forced kings to kneel not only to him but to the Christ whose banner he bore, and though many cursed his name, they could not resist his power. The sagas say he rode the waves as though they were his own road, that his ships outpaced the storms themselves, and that he laughed when the heavens split with thunder, for he was kin to the tempest. He returned again and again to Norway, bearing spoils and warriors, each time greater in number than before. Men from across the seas came to fight for him, Danes, Swedes, Irishmen, all bound by gold and by the force of his will. His fleet grew to be the mightiest in the north, and his flagship, the Long Serpent, was the greatest ship ever built, its hull long and sleek, its dragon head snarling across the waves, its deck wide enough to hold 100 men. It was a floating fortress and a throne of war for Olaf the SeaKing. But envy rises where greatness shines, and in the shadows his enemies conspired. The kings of Denmark and Sweden looked upon Olaf with fear, for he had grown too strong, too bold, too dangerous, and in secret they joined hands with the Jarls of Norway, who had bent their knee in appearance but kept treachery in their hearts. Together they wove a net of steel and fire to snare him and end his reign. The trap was set at Svolder, a narrow place where the sea closed in like a noose. Olaf sailed unsuspecting, his fleet spread wide across the waters, his enemies hidden behind islands and in the mist. And when the Long Serpent came into the grasp, the horizon darkened with ships more than any man could count, the sails of Denmark and Sweden, the banners of traitorous Jarls rising like a wall before him. Yet when others might have fled, Olaf laughed, for his blood sang with the promise of battle. He ordered his fleet to close and the Long Serpent to take the lead. His warriors gathered upon the deck, shields, bright swords gleaming, their king among them, clad in armor, his golden hair shining like flame. He spoke no words of fear, only of glory. He told them that this day would be remembered, that the deeds would echo in the sagas of men and gods alike, and his men roared his name as the enemy bore down upon them. The battle of Svolder raged like a storm upon the waters. Ships clashed, shield walls rose and fell, arrows darkened the sky and blood stained the waves red. Olaf stood at the heart of it, his sword carving through foes, his shield ringing with blows, his voice carrying above the chaos. He leapt from ship to ship, striking down those who dared face him, and his men followed with the fury of wolves. Though they were outnumbered, though the sea was choked with enemy sails, still they held the line, still they fought with the fire of their king. One by one his ships were crushed or burned, his warriors falling about him, yet still he did not yield. The Long Serpent fought like a beast of legend, its dragon head rising defiantly above the waters, even as fire licked its timbers and the enemy swarmed its sides. Olaf struck again and again until the deck was slick with blood and the air heavy with smoke. The kings of Denmark and Sweden watched in awe, for never had they seen a man fight with such fury, never had they seen a king so fearless in the face of certain death. At last the Long Serpent groaned beneath the weight of the enemy, and the sea reached up to claim her. Yet Olaf did not wait for defeat to be thrust upon him. He chose his own fate. He stood tall upon the deck, his armor shining, his sword still in his hand. He looked to the sky and to the sea, and he laughed a laugh that carried across the waves, a laugh that chilled the hearts of his enemies and lifted the spirits of his dying men. And then he cast himself into the deep. The waters closed about him, but the sagas say he did not die. They whisper that the sea claimed him as its own, that he was carried away by the waves to dwell in hidden places until the day Norway calls again for her greatest king. Some say he walked upon distant shores disguised yet watching. Some say he sails still upon a ghostly longship prow, cutting through storms and mist, his dragon head gleaming under the moon. And when the wind howls and the sea roars, it is his voice that echoes across the waves. Thus ended the reign of Olaf Tryggvason, not with surrender, not with chains, not with shame, but with a leap into immortality. He was born of storm, raised by hardship, crowned by battle, and in the end he chose his own death. He became not only a king but a legend, not only a man but a saga carved into the soul of the North. His enemies may have taken his throne, but they could not take his glory, for Olaf Tryggvason lives wherever the sea rages, wherever warriors raise theory swords, wherever men speak of courage and destiny. And so his name endures, Olaf, the Sea King, Olaf, the storm, Olaf, the unbroken. His spirit sails forever upon the waves, his laughter mingling with thunder, his sword flashing in the lightning. And when the world grows dark and Norway stands upon the edge of ruin, the sagas say he will rise again to lead his people as he once did, with fire and faith, with steel and storm. For men like Olaf do not perish, they become the very soul of their people, eternal, unyielding, forever heroic.